Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to October's History Room Live. My name is Mary Kate Kwasnik, and I'm the Archivist and Special Collections Librarian here at the Patent-Free Library. History Room Live is a monthly program out of the Sagadahoc History and Genealogy Room here at PFL, and we do our best to bring you monthly speakers, primary sources, and workshops that aim to highlight the history of Maine and our communities. Today, in honor of Halloween, I'm going to be sharing some spooky stories from the history room. Since we don't have a huge collection of ghost stories in the history room, I found most of these stories in our digitized newspapers, our subject file on ghosts, and in a really interesting Greater Bath Area Folklore Survey done in 1999 by Robin Hansen. So please note that for each story, I've chosen an image from our collections, but it definitely does not necessarily represent the house I'm talking about or the thing. It's just thematic, unless I say so. It's just kind of fun visuals. If you're on Zoom, you may notice that this is actually a Zoom meeting instead of our usual Zoom webinar, and that's so that if you choose to, you can share your own local spooky tales with us. I'm going to start by sharing a handful of ghost stories that I found in the history room collections, and then I'm going to turn it over to anyone else who wants to share anything. So if you're in person, you'll notice we're kind of in a circle. Imagine this Zoom meeting owl as like a campfire, and we're all telling stories around the campfire, if you will. Okay. So we are going to start with our scary stories at Thornhead Preserve in North Bath, and then we're going to move our way through Bath, move south, move out to the ocean, but this is where we start. On September 4th, 1883, two men were caught attempting to break into the D.C. Gould ship chandlery and provision store in Bath. As they were running away, they collided with Constable William Lawrence, and one of the burglars, Daniel Wilkinson, shot Constable Lawrence dead. The two fled Bath, but were arrested in Bangor about a week after the murder. Allegedly, Wilkinson and his partner hid in this cave at Thornhead before fleeing to Bangor. And this is the cave. This is from the Celt website and kind of a map of where you can find this cave. After he was caught, Wilkinson was charged with and convicted of murder in 1884 and was sentenced to death by hanging. It did not go the way it was supposed to go, and his execution was used by anti-death penalty activists who fought for Maine to abolish the death penalty, which it did in 1887. This Bath Daily Times piece that I'm going to read from September 19th, 1883, describes their hiding spot in the cave, which you can still find and visit today. The cave where Wilkinson hid. The cave which Wilkinson, the murderer, described to the Times reporter as located in the vicinity of Thorn's Head proves to be a place well known to a number of our citizens. It's a place large enough for 3 or 4 men and is formed by a fissure in the rock, the top being entirely covered with the exception of a small opening at the rear. The place is on the westerly side of the point, is some little distance from the water, and is secluded by a thick growth of bushes. It can readily be found by anyone searching for it. The prisoner gave a description of the place and how to reach it. A path from the end of High Street leads nearly to the spot. Its presence was first known to the public some 30 years ago, and its discovery was owing to the slight opening in the rear. The late A.C. Raymond Esquire, with a crew of men, was engaged at the time in setting the telegraph poles which supported the wire that formerly crossed the Kennebec River at this point. And one day, the party were surprised to see a column of smoke issuing from the ground. Approaching the spot, they saw the small opening, and further investigation revealed to them the cave, a most excellent place of concealment, and which then was occupied by a man named Sewell, a hard character rarely seen in the daytime, whose place of living was till then unknown. 2 Bath gentlemen yesterday visited the cave and noted indications of the place having been recently occupied. The remains of a recent fire were seen outside near the entrance to the cave, and a quantity of dry fuel was found inside. The copper shell of a cartridge was picked up, and another was found among the ashes and dead coals. It is not unlikely that this was the rendezvous of Wilkinson and his friend. and the time he spent in the cave when fleeing from pursuit was doubtless for his pal to join him, but the latter failed to come, and Wilkinson, deeming the place unsafe, stole the boat, as has already been narrated, crossed the river, and escaped for the time. And from there, they were caught and pulled over. Okay. So from here, we're moving from Thornhead and we're going to move south down High Street with this story from the Bath Independent, October 14th, 1882. And what you can see here is one of our maps in the boardroom, which shows the general spot of where this house took place. This is an 1851 map, but this story is from 1882. And this map kind of shows where the alleged haunted house was, like kind of here where High Street meets Harvard Street, where my mouse is.
Where is that? Where's Harvard Street?
It's north. If you go north on High Street, if you know where Winship Street is, it's kind of like a curvy street. Yeah, near the old hospital. It's loosely where it was. I don't think that house is still there, and I don't think it was still. It's not on other maps that we see. Okay. A haunted house in which supernatural events occur. A dead lover bewails his fate in a ruined house on High Street. On the top of the knoll on High Street, just above Major Harwood's estate, is a large two-story house with L, every window of which is out and which has not for some years been occupied. Not far above is the old shanty where Theodore Planter 2 winters ago was found dead over a pile of kindling by our reporter. We were up that way on Tuesday last evening and learned that the house is haunted by the ghost, it said, of Theodore, who it will be remembered was the lifelong victim of disappointment in love. That is not how I want to be remembered. Only on the darkest and stormiest of nights, between the hours of 10 and 2, blue and red lights are said to illuminate the old mansion, and a man whose face looks, it is claimed, like that of Theodore, pale and haggard, and whose form is clothed in flowing light garments, appears through the ruined windows, promenading about the deserted rooms. The house frequently is lighted up with brilliancy from cellar to garret, and hideous noises, like a many voice uttering complaint, are distinctly heard. These noises have been distinguished, it is claimed, as, "Oh, my love," many times repeated. After these nocturnal events have ceased, the place resumes its quietness. Whether there is truth or not in this yarn, we cannot say, but think very likely the ghostly visions are the offspring of folks' fancy, and the wailing of Theodore, the sighing of the midnight wind through the windowless rooms of the deserted house. So that's up to you. The newspaper made that clear. That's up to you to decide what that's about. Okay. So now let's wander south down High Street and turn onto Winter Street towards Washington Street. And we'll stop right in front of the Winter Street Church. This is a much more recent article from May 2019 in the Portland Press Herald, and it names the Winter Street Church as a haunted site in Maine. Although the Press Herald doesn't name their sources, they report the following. Children cry in the old church. Bath's Winter Street Center used to be a church. According to some, hospitals were overflowing, so the church housed victims of the Spanish flu back in 1918. Groups have had unexplained encounters. One guest purportedly saw a child standing in the balcony of the sanctuary. Recordings have also picked up strange noises that no one could explain, like footsteps and cries for help. So I don't know, we have a lot of patrons here who volunteer there, so I'll have to ask them about their experiences there. From Washington Street, we'll move west into West Bath, into Witch Spring. This image here, this is actually of Witch Spring Cemetery, because I don't have any images of Witch Spring. So this article is from the Bath Independent, October 31st, 1950, a very timely, spooky article, and it gives one story. I know there's many different theories, but one story of how Witch Spring got its name. Many of the present generation, speaking of Witch Spring, think that the spring near Witch Spring Inn is the original spring, but they are wrong. The present spring did not come into being until the modern highway was built out that way for Route 1, because in 1950 this was new. The original witch spring was on the west side of the road to Barry's Mill, but a few yards south from the present number 1 highway. There was an old wooden trough hewed from a log, and into this trough the water was carried from a few feet back from the old witch spring. To be sure, that was in the horse and buggy days, and the horses were watered there and at the trough, which was always covered with a generous supply of tin signs advertising various patent medicines and washing powders, etc. Why was it called Witch Spring? Well, the story is that in the early days of this locality, when Bath was part of Georgetown, a party was coming in by the old spring well along in the night. They saw something moving among the trees. It was something white, which they took to be a ghost or a witch. And from then on, it became known as Witch Spring, although the moving figure they had seen in the moonlight, moving about in the trees and shrubbery, happened to be a white horse pastured there. And there are other theories. There are quite a few theories about how it got its name. And I don't know which one's true. I'm not sure. So from Witch Spring, we're going to head east down the Kennebec to the Seguin Light. This October 1997 Portland Press Herald article. You can also grab some chairs over there if they're all split up. The October 27th, 1997 Portland Press Herald article explores haunted lighthouses all over the region. So I'm just going to read the part about Seguin. The writer says the following. Seguin Island Light near Phippsburg is one of the oldest, windiest, foggiest, and loneliest outposts in the state. So naturally, ghosts like it there. Seguin has a number of them. According to one legend, a keeper and his wife brought a piano to the island to entertain themselves. The keeper's wife learned to play, but only one song. She played it over and over and over. The keeper eventually took an axe to the piano, then his wife, and then himself. Someone should fact check that though. I don't know, that might just be a legend, probably. To this day, fishermen on those foggy nights out on the water hear this piano music coming from this island, said Harrison, who's someone they quote earlier in the article as a lighthouse gift shop owner. And there's no one on the island. More recent occupants have talked about 2 other ghosts, an old keeper in slickers and a young girl who likes to bounce a ball behind the closed door of a bedroom. Keepers have said that they felt or saw both of the apparitions and could sometimes hear a ball bouncing. They also reported some of the typical innocent ghost tricks, like jackets taken off of hooks and piled on the floor, objects and furniture rearranged. Or if you have a 3-year-old, they might do that too. Around 1985, Seguin Light was automated and members of the Coast Guard stayed on the island to pack up all the furniture. According to one story in Thompson's film, that's someone earlier in the piece who did a documentary about New England haunted lighthouses. According to one story in Thompson's film, one of the men was awakened during this day by an apparition in oilskins pleading with him to leave his furniture. The next day, a load of the furniture mysteriously got stuck on the tramway and then spilled into the ocean. That night, the ghost reappeared. "I can't feed my family," he wailed. "Why did you do this to me?" Perfectly sensible people have reported seeing friendly apparitions, which Thompson says could be lingering energy from a former life. So if you're not a believer, it may just be that your antennae are asleep or you're not in the right environment. Forget the Ouija board, go to a lighthouse. Okay, this next one I'm gonna read is really long, so I'm not gonna read the whole thing. And it's actually not something, it was published in the Bath Daily Times on November 16th, 1894, but it's a story from out at sea, not from our location, but it's just really fun. So this image also, by the way, the one that I just had of the Seguin, like this is from our Patricia E. Bonner collection of little kids outside the light. And I just like it because it's a little spooky with their faces all blurred. And this is not a haunted ship. It's just a ship that we have in the collection, but I thought it fit really nicely. So Ghosts of the Sea. So this piece is telling a story told in an old sailor's home by an old mate named Bob Ailing. And he had been a sailor for some 50 years. And he's telling all of those around him some scary things he experienced at sea. So I'm going to pick up kind of in the middle of the article. As I said, boys, the old man went on, it's the ships that never went out from any port that a sailor never forgets when he sees one of them. We may remember the ships that went out and never came back for a time if we had a shipmate aboard, but we can forget. But there's no forgetting a ghost of the sea. It was back in the early 50s, it was the 1850s, that I saw my first sea ghost. And today I can shut my eyes and see it just as plain as I could see it then. I was a sailor on a fishing schooner, and we were catching cod off the coast of Newfoundland. We had been out 10 days and were almost ready to start for home with a full cargo when a nasty offshore breeze came on late one evening. We stood out to sea, for there was a heavy fog along with the wind. It was a stiff and steady blow. So we rode the waves under bare poles during the night, waiting for daylight and the fog to lift before shaping our course for home. All through the night, we sent up rockets at intervals and kept the ship's bell going because we could not see 10 feet ahead at times on account of the fog. But it was nearly morning before we heard or saw an answering signal to warn us that another vessel was near. I was on the early morning watch, and about half an hour before daylight, I made out a signal light a short distance ahead on our port bow. It was a strange light, pale blue in color, and it flashed up and down at irregular intervals. The fog was still thick, and it was impossible to tell how near we were to the vessel. I called the mate on deck, and pointed to the strange signal light. He looked at it a long time, and with a shaking of his head, he said he could not make it out at all. The light showed that the vessel could not be far away. So we changed our course a little, and then we fired a gun. There was no answer, and we fired again and again with the same result. By and by, I saw that the mate was very grave and queer looking. He was pacing back and forth on the deck, not minding the cold, misty rain that was falling. And all the time he kept his eyes fixed on that queer-looking bluish light that flashed up out of the fog and darkness ahead. At last, I made so bold as to ask the mate what he thought of it. "It's a ghost," he said, looking at me with a pitying look. "A ghost?" says I. "Yes, a ghost of the sea. Wait till the fog lifts. You may see it then." The fog lifted a bit when daylight came, and then I saw the ghost, as the mate said I would. Rising grim and white out of the fog and waves that were rolling high, I saw a full-rigged ship of queer design. The wind was blowing half a gale, but not a mast or pole of the ghost ship bent an inch, and not one of the broad white sails seemed to strain at the ropes. The Phantom was close on our port bow, and as the fog cleared away, we had a splendid view from her waterline to the top of her masts. With the waves pitching and rolling high and the wind howling around our poles, the ghost ship was riding out the storm as steady as a painted ship on a painted canvas ocean. Every man on board crowded on deck, and while they had to hold onto the railing to keep from being washed overboard, they stood and gazed at the Phantom ship as long as it was in sight. Some of them that were a bit religious-like made the sign of the cross, and others tried to say a bit of a prayer. The fact is that every man on board thought the Phantom ship a warning of death. The captain went below and drank a hot grog till he was reckless. I just think that's so funny. Till he was that reckless that the ghost had no terrors for him. Then as the wind went a bit down, he ordered us to make sail and bear down on the Phantom ship. Up went our sail in a jiffy, and we flew along before the wind, but we could get no nearer the Phantom ship. Suddenly, we saw the white ghost ship lurch forward. Her sails trembled for an instant, and then she seemed to sink straight down into the sea. 10 seconds from the time we saw the first quiver of her sails, the ship had vanished, and we never saw her again. During the day, the storm went down, and putting about, we made port in safety. But when that schooner sailed for the fishing banks again, It was with an entirely new crew, from captain to cabin boy. Not a man who saw that ghost ship from her deck would sail on that schooner again. Such is the old sailor belief in ghosts of the sea as warnings of danger. The men who see one of them will never sail again on the same ship if they live to see port. Scary stuff. Okay. This one, I kept seeing over and over again, multiple copies in our ghost subject file in the history room. And it was published in the Bath Daily Times on December 23rd, 1890. But I don't think it happened in Bath. The person who it happened to was from Bath. But if you look at the top of the article, it's reported from Lynn. So I think this happened in Lynn, Massachusetts, but we can claim the victim as our own. And this is a little grisly. I also, to verify to a point that I think this happened in Lynn, Massachusetts, I went on Ancestry through Massachusetts death records, and I found someone of the same name who was deceased in Lynn, Massachusetts just a few days before this article. So this article was published on December 23rd, 1890, and the death record I found was from December 15th, 1890, same name, and death by accident. Okay. Wanted, his jawbone. A man's spirit could not rest in the grave. Lynn, December 21st. Last week, a man named York of Bath, Maine, was killed by the Portland Express while attempting to cross the tracks in the depot. He was so ground up that pieces of his bones were picked up for quite a distance along the track. I know, that's terrible. All these were collected and interred with the remains, except a piece of the lower jawbone, which, with several teeth, were missing. The authorities searched for it in vain. It seems that the bone was picked up by George Carpenter of the Borden house, who intended to keep it as a memento. Out of this occurred a remarkable incident, which is today the talk of the town. Carpenter is a friend of Mr. Bettenhausen, the well-known Monroe Street cigar manufacturer. He showed his relic in confidence to Mr. Bettenhausen, who, knowing something of anatomy, offered to take it home and clean it for him. The bone was given to him, and he took it to his store and put it away in a box on a shelf until he could have time to attend to it. No one knew but himself where he had placed it. Now comes the strange part of the story. He got the bone on Tuesday, and on Friday night the incident occurred. There are two entrances to his shop, one of which is locked and bolted all the time. Mr. Bettenhausen had just begun preparations for leaving when he was startled by seeing a man sitting on a chair near the bolted door. Knowing it was impossible for anyone to have passed him from the outer door without his knowing, he was too much astonished to speak for some moments, as he is a man fearless of anything on earth. He soon recovered and then asked, "What is your business here?" "I've come," was the answer, "for the piece of my jaw that you have in that box on the shelf." "Your jaw? Why, I borrowed that of George Carpenter at the Borden house," replied Mr. Bettenhausen. "Well, I've come for it. I want it buried with the rest of my body." Mr. Bettenhausen, thinking that he was being made the victim of a practical joke, reached towards a shelf for the loaded revolver that he keeps there. Not a third of a second was consumed in doing that, but when he turned back to the spot where the figure had been, it was vacant. The businessman felt his hair straighten a little and a cold perspiration break out all over him. He pinched himself to see if he was awake or if he was dreaming. Then he grabbed his coat and hat and rushed to the street. Not all the money in Monroe Street would have tempted him just then to go into the shop again and put things to rights. He just turned the keys and went home. The next morning, he returned the piece to Mr. Carpenter with the remark, "It's the last time I'll ever do that again." The story got noised abroad, I'm not sure what that means, and promptly the medical examiner pounced on Mr. Carpenter and confiscated his relic. It will be buried, and Mr. York's soul will then be put at rest. The next three stories that we're going to end with are a little less scary. I know I've shared a lot of terrors, and they're a little bit more fun. So this next piece that I'm going to read about, this one, This was published in the October 9th, 1880 issue of the Bath Independent. That ghost and how it frightened some folks. Late the other night, some ladies had been out to a party and they were returning unattended to their homes up Washington Street. They were young and consequently were merry. Suddenly, a shriek was heard, and the foremost girl seized her umbrella with a fiendish grip. A ghost, she cried. Of course, the rest yelled, and all ran down the street. Meeting a policeman, they returned, reassured to find Mr. Ghost in one of the yards of a fine Washington Street residence, not this one. Just to be clear, that's not the one. Although I don't know for a fact, could be. In one of the yards of a fine Washington Street residence was, to be sure, the ghost. It certainly looked like a spook. The girls had all conceded it to be a ghost, and as the policeman looked over the fence, it certainly was like a ghost. And the night being dark and all too still, he of the Star and Club wished it didn't quite so much resemble a wraith. He climbed the fence and said, "Who's there?" No answer. He edged nearer. "Who's there?" again called he. No answer. It was getting sort of disagreeable. To be sure, the officer didn't believe in ghosts, but still in the dim starlight, that white form standing silently against the dark background of the house certainly had the appearance of being a ghost. "I'll shoot you if you don't make yourself known," said the officer. Meantime, the bevy of girls were huddled against the fence, frightened half to death, but very curious. "Leave my plants alone! Help! Police!" shouted, or rather shrieked, the voice of a female from the window above, also robed like a ghost. All became suddenly still, save the clattering of the officer's boots downtown. So I think it was the lady. Okay, here's another haunted house tale. This one comes from the November 23rd, 1904 issue of the Bath Independent about a rather tone-deaf ghost. A haunted house, mysterious piano playing at night startles a household. In these days, we hear comparatively little about haunted houses, but one Bath family has had an experience which caused them all kinds of fear and led them for the time being to believe in ghosts and goblins. It seems that one night after all had retired and were safe in dreamland, they were suddenly startled by a noise on the lower floor, evidently in the parlor. It was a sort of scratching followed by a thump. At first, it was supposed to be rats. But when a few minutes later, the discordant notes of the piano were heard, thoughts of ghosts and goblins came over the inmates. The head of the house knew burglars wouldn't make such a racket, as he is inclined to be a little superstitious. It was some time before he could make up his mind to investigate. Finally, he lighted a lamp and with beads of cold perspiration on his brow, went downstairs, gave the parlor door a quick push, and as he did so, the lamp went out and the piano gave forth a louder tone than ever, followed by a thump and a silence as the family cat jumped from the piano to the floor and came purring towards him. There was a broken pane of glass in the window through which the cat had entered. Then the animal had jumped upon the keyboard of the piano, and when Mr. So-and-so pushed the door open, the sudden draft of air extinguished the light and the cat jumped down. It is needless to add in conclusion that a new square of glass has taken the place of the broken pane. Okay, and this last one is not scary at all, but just a little taste of how people might have celebrated Halloween in the past. So this comes from the October 29th, 1900 issue of the Bath Daily Times. Halloween, how Bath young people will observe weird night. One dancing party on the bill, mystic rites by which young men and maidens may learn interesting things concerning the future. So if you're having a Halloween party, you might get some ideas from this article. Plans are now being made by Bath young people for the celebration of Halloween, which arrives next Wednesday. On that mystic night, high carnival will be held at many homes in town, from early evening until the advent of another bleak November. Within the brilliantly decorated assembly hall of Kennebec Yacht Club, sparkling spirits will trip the light fantastic toes in time with the captivating music of Columbia's best artists. The affair will be the second assembly of the season and promises to be a grand success. There is a long, weird list of games for Halloween night, and some of the more interesting ones will be enjoyed in Bath. Much amusement can be created by placing a lighted candle on one end of a stick and an apple on the other. Suspend the stick from the ceiling and set it spinning. Then have the members of the party try to catch the apple in their teeth while they endeavor to avoid the blaze of the candle. The game causes considerable excitement. Bobbing for apples floating in a tub is another game that causes no end of fun and might be very comfortably following the apple and candle game if the noses of any daring players are blistered. By simply throwing an apple paring like a peel over your left shoulder, initials of the future husband or wife can be seen. The paring must be, of course, of sufficient length to take the required form. Then there is the Scotch test of luggies, in which 3 dishes are used. One filled with pure diamond spring water, another dish filled with muddy water, and a third empty. If the person blindfolded encounters the clean water with a young man or maiden will be the future partner. If the muddy water is the fluid touched, the future partner will be a widow or widower, and a dip in the empty dish signifies that the unfortunate will never be married. A familiar custom in the shipping city is pouring melted lead into a dish of cold water. After the metal hardens, one with the aid of a little elastic imagination can make out the vocation of the groom from the lead. Many games as interesting as the ones described can be easily originated with considerable pleasure after dwelling thoughtfully on the weird beliefs, the mysterious art of calling spirits from the vasty deep, low lights, wizardry and stories told in a blood-curdling way by hovering ghosts. The last hour of the celebration can be made exceedingly impressive by clever storytellers who will relate spooky yarns while those kneeling around the smoldering embers of the fireplace hold their breath. Then let them see as they depart a jack-o'-lantern in the dark. It sounds like a great party.
Explains all the house fires.
I recommend anybody play that apple candy game or the lead one. It doesn't sound good.
It's like the term elastic imagination.
I do too. I've never heard that, but I do like it. So before I close us out, I just want to give anybody another chance to share any scary stories. I don't think I have any, but I just want to make sure everybody's got their chance.
I don't have any stories, but I do have something to pass along. Back in the days when we all had DVD players, A&E channel did this series called Haunted History. And there's one DVD on Haunted Maine.
Yes.
Okay. And it's got a lot of different stories across Maine, including the one about the Sequin Lighthouse-keeper. So if you want to look that up, I'm sure you can get a hold of it, or maybe you can stream it now. It's A&E's Haunted History, and it's Haunted Maine. And the only other thing I got is, you had that picture of USS Constitution on Popham Beach, Pop Harbor. The USS Constitution itself is supposed to be. So, and you can see that in the Inner Harbor Ballroom, sorry.
Very cool. Big.
I will say that I kind of regret all the beautiful houses in Bath that used to be haunted. And people have come in and made them into these beautiful homes. There's one right on the corner of the park that used to scare us, and now it's just this beautiful house. So I guess maybe the ghosts still live there, but they don't look the part anymore.
They're not so spooky.
Not a
I bet the ghosts still live there.
probably.
I don't think a coat of paint will deter them.
Yeah, probably a little deeper than I could have had.
Yeah, probably.
But they were really, there were several on Washington Street. I grew up on Washington Street and they used to just terrify us, and more, they're beautiful.
So less spooky, but probably still.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah, I hope so. Anybody else? No, okay. I'm gonna go into my very last screen share to just talk about what I'm gonna do next month. Having such a hard time with it today, I don't know why. Share. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this month's terrifying tales of ghosts and ghouls. Next month will be a very, very different feel. On November 15th at 5 p.m., all are invited to a screening of the Emmy Award-winning documentary Dawnland, followed by a post-film discussion. Dawnland is a documentary that follows Maine and the United States' first Truth and Reconciliation Commission as they investigate the removal of Native American children from their homes to save them from being Indian. From the filmmakers, Dawnland goes behind the scenes as this historic body grapples with difficult truths, redefines reconciliation, and charts a new course for state and tribal relations. So we'll be doing that screening at 5 p.m. here with the discussion at 6 because it's about an hour long. And for those of you who'd like to join us on Zoom, you can register for the Zoom discussion, which will be at 6 p.m. And upon confirmation, you'll receive a link in your email and password to stream the film at your leisure before the discussion. So you can either watch in person with us and discuss in person or watch at home ahead of time and then just join us for the discussion. Thank you again and happy Halloween.